Hey friends, it's Ariel, and I'm here to talk about something that is close to my heart, which is the struggle of having a parent diagnosed with cancer. Um, there's all the different aspects of that, going through the process and dealing with it, and, if they're terminal and dying, and those are so many different things, but the first thing that happens is somebody tells you. And so this video is because I felt very strongly when I got help from hospice at the end of my mom's life that the things that they said to me, it would have been really good if somebody had said that to me like the day that they told me she had cancer. So it was so well, because hospice gets death, right? Hospice gets, and it's not a scary thing. Like, they can talk about it. Granted, it's not like you want to talk about necessarily, okay, you have cancer and you're going to die and blah, blah, blah. But, my mom's cancer was possibly terminal. And so, in the sense that, it wasn't going to be possible to get it out. Now, how long she would live and stuff, that kind of thing, was not sure. And she did end up living for 8.5 years after that. But she did have 2 brain surgeries and 2 types of radiation and chemotherapy. And then the last, basically, 3.5 years, she just slowly died. But so during that whole process was really hard. But when I was 13 and a half was when we found out my mom had cancer. She had a seizure in bed one night, and I remember going in her room and seeing that, and being somebody who's diagnosed with epilepsy, I'd actually never had seen anyone have a seizure because I was usually unconscious. So anyway, then she got an MRI, and not exactly sure the timing, but my parents, pretty soon after, I remember it so well. I feel like it's one of those moments in my life when, well, heck, it's a big moment, right? My dad and my mom were in our family room, and we had a living room, dining room, kitchen, and then there was a family room in the back that used to be a bedroom, that we kind of turned it into a family room, guest room. So they told us, and I just remember my dad more, I think he was the one doing most of the talking. And so we went back there, and they were saying, we have something difficult to tell you. And of course, that walk to the family room, when you hear that, is scary as hell. Because I knew it was something big. I mean, we knew what was going on, and anyway, and I mean, we didn't know what was going on with my mom, as in, so during that time, I knew that things were possible, and when they say that, you're like, oh shit, now we're gonna find out this is horrible, right? Well, we did, but one of the things that stuck with me so much was that the moment that they said, whatever it was that, I don't remember exactly what they said, but your mom has a brain tumor. And that's as far as I got, because in that moment, I instantly went to what can I do? And that doesn't have to happen in that moment. And I made a decision to never let my mom do too much again, because she was sick, and she was, whatever, it's life-threatening, and I would do everything I could to prevent her from dying. So, and I just remember that because, once I understood, I understood enough that she had cancer, and that she, like I said, it was, she had an oligodendroglioma tumor in her right frontal lobe, and basically it was spread out like this because the glial cells are like that, and so it's hard to remove, and it's hard to do radiation, chemo, all of that on it, because you're going to kill tissue that's also good tissue, not cancerous, and you can never fully take it out because it is mixed into other parts of the brain. So, explaining that to us, whatever part of that, I did understand that it was possibly terminal, right? So, and my parents and everybody tried to have like a good attitude about it. I don't think that helps personally. Because the thing is, you kind of need to just talk about the elephant in the room, which is like, mom might die, okay? Rather than trying to be like, oh, but she should be okay, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that, and we're gonna do this, because then you're always kind of like, you're not talking about the reality of what could happen. And that's actually like important. And so when we got hospice, I was one of my mom's main caregivers, and my brother, and we had some other people working through a program, and but we didn't have enough help. And so toward the end of my mom's life, I was staying with her, and my brother did a lot, and he was like between 15 and 18 in high school when he did that. And it was really traumatic for all of us, and I really wish he didn't have to go through that at that time. But he did a lot too, and we didn't have financial help very much, and we didn't have people help very much, and not for lack of trying. But I will say that during that time, that was the worst time of my life, and there were other things going on for me that added into that, right? And going on for our family that added into that. But part of it was also just, we didn't have anybody talking to us about any of this, until hospice came. And the thing is that hospice came once she was really sick, right? But for her, it actually ended up being 6 months on hospice, which is very unusual. It's because she died so slowly. I mean, it's terrible to say that, but like, it's true. She really died slowly, and it was really, really horrible, and really drawn out. And part of the thing about that was that when hospice came and talked to me, like, they were helping, and I didn't have to do everything anymore. Like, it was amazing. It was, I would give all my money to hospice if I could. They made the last 6 months of my mom's life so much better for me. Things actually really improved for me. So as sad as that is, the last 6 months of my mom's life was actually way better than the few years before, when she'd been more functional. But with the support of hospice and having enough help and nurses, and they had a social worker to talk to the family, and it's like, what? Okay, yeah, that's pretty basic. Like, and I just remember finally sometime the social worker came, and she was asking me how I was feeling about all this, and I'm kind of like nobody ever asked me that. And no doctor's office, no, personally, I think when you tell your kids you need to have a social worker or somebody, a therapist, a counselor, hey, a teen counselor, somebody who deals with death, right? Like, there. I honestly think the best way to do it would be if you had somebody for the kids to talk to immediately after. And because what I went into was this space of, oh my God, I have to do all this stuff for my mom, and I can't let her do too much anymore, because that's why she has a brain tumor, is she's been stressed and stuff. And that comes from multiple people saying different things. But basically, because also it's like, well, why do you have cancer? But basically my mom's family said that it was our fault, the kids, because we had made my mom too stressed out. And so that really was hard, because I felt very guilty about that. and felt like I just needed to do more because, well, I didn't want her to die. It gets pretty basic sometimes. So, for the next like 8.5 years, my whole mindset was about not letting my mom do too much because she would die. So anyway, what I was saying about the, person being there is that you need to talk it out after, because the things that you think of in those moments, it's like it's very reactionary, right? It's very deep and very oftentimes not the best thing, if that makes sense. Being 13 and hearing that and then instantly going into like, I'm never going to let my mom do the dishes again, is just a really intense experience. And also, I didn't want to stress her out. And also, it's hard to stay close to somebody who is going to die. I should say that for myself. It was hard for me to stay close to my mom knowing she was going to die. So when I talked to hospice, the social worker told me that, asked me how I was feeling. Like I said, nobody had asked me how I was feeling ever, about it. And so I said I was angry, right? And I'd struggled with that a lot because it's like, I was mad at my mom, and yet in the situation, I felt so guilty about being mad at her because she's the one that's dying, right? Like, it doesn't work in your head necessarily of like, well, I don't want to be mad at my mom because she's not doing anything on purpose. But like, that social worker told me, oh yeah, it's totally normal to be mad at the person for leaving you, essentially, right? And with my mom, it went on over such a long amount of time that it was literally like a slow grief process, slow dying process. And so in the same way, it was, really a lot of time to feel like my mom was slipping away, which left me a lot of time to try to deal with my feelings around it. Years and years of it. So that was really, really important, that idea. I wish somebody would have talked to me about that at the very beginning. Also, it's not my fault, right? And I think most people, in abuse, in death, and all kinds of things, you blame yourself. But definitely, I blamed myself. I would say other people blamed me too. It didn't help that other people that said things and stuff that, that really were horrible. So, yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to think that. But in general, it happens often, as we know, in situations where people blame themselves for things that they're not actually responsible for or able to change, or need to blame themselves for. Really is not helpful. So those things, if somebody had talked to me like right after that, I think they could have talked me out of that state of like fear and hypervigilance that I went into immediately, and helped me with some of the emotions, because if you can get past the immediate thoughts that happen, right, and what are you going to do about it, since I think that was a normal reaction for me to be like, what do we do about it now, because fuck, if somebody tells you like, and your mom could die, and it's like really hard not to just want to like get into doing it mode, right? At least for me. I just wanted to do something about it, right? Do everything that I possibly could, right? Like to save her, and that concept and stuff stayed with me all the way till she died. And the thing with the social worker telling me that it was not my fault, and also not my fault for being mad at my mom. Like, there was nothing wrong with it to be mad, right? And also, it didn't mean I didn't love my mom, right? And it wasn't like it was her fault, but like, it's okay to still feel that way because that's what it feels like for a lot of people when somebody's leaving you. And like I said, you're not blaming them exactly because it's not like they have control over it, but you know, it's a feeling that comes up, right? You know, the different types of grief that come up. I think I cycled through the grief a lot. Unfortunately, that's kind of been a thing in my life because I kept losing my own health and functionality and memory and all these kinds of things. And then my mom, you know, and so then I just continued to lose things in my life, you know, my dad, and then more of my health and more of my abilities and that my mom. And so, you know, that whole grief cycle, I was just thinking today, like, I would love to have a chunk of time that did not include grieving. Because when you have chronic illness, I mean, literally every day, it's another thing of like, oh, hell, I can't do that, you know, and like, I really want to, and I wish I could, and you know, I have to like give things up all the time, and they can take a long time to deal with, right? Like, you know, I've been really sick for a long time, but I mean, sick where I couldn't do much physically for like 12 years. And before that, you know, I could still move around more and stuff. And a bit before that, I could still dance and everything. And I stopped dancing when it was no longer fun because I was so sick and tired that I couldn't enjoy it anymore. Like I couldn't. I just wanted to lie down on the floor and sleep. And that takes the fun out of it. As well as I just got so sick that I had to lie on the floor and sleep and couldn't dance and stuff. Anyway, but just that whole thing of you grieve all of that, and it just takes a lot of time and energy to deal with that. And since, you know, after I couldn't dance, I guess for me, it's like, I'm still going to keep grieving that. Like, there are things that I think you can never not grieve. But like I said, the grief cycle of going through all these different things, having a chronic illness, it's pretty much constant. And especially if you're going downhill. So if you have something that is progressive, and or like in my case, I have some things that are genetic, right? And so it's essentially progressive, right? Like it doesn't have to get worse, but it does because life happens, and you know, my joint disease just keeps getting worse because life goes on and my joints are worse, right? Like, but it does mean that I'm continue to lose abilities over and over. You know, 2 years ago, it was writing and typing. I mean, it took me a while to try to deal with that. The only good thing about that is that I can make my nails long and it doesn't matter because I can't write or type anyway. Silver lining, right? I try to see that. And sometimes it's not good enough. I'm like, fuck that. But, you know, sometimes it's helpful to look at what I do get out of it. Yeah. The importance, though, of having somebody talk to your kids and not the parents, you know? They're having a hard enough time that I don't think they can get out of their heads about it. And they're so worried about, you know, their kids taking this in that I think they're freaked out. I mean, yeah, it needs to be somebody outside the family. Specifically, like somebody who's trained in that. Like, social worker from hospice would be the best. Really. I mean, really. And I just wish that was possible, right? Like, maybe at, you know, in one of the oncology units somewhere, they could just have like a thing where they make it that, you know, when somebody's diagnosed with something and they need to tell other people, you can come in there and somebody will be there, you know, like you can plan an appointment with a social worker and your family, and you go in there and like tell them and then deal with the emotions and stuff. And rather than, you know, tell them and then like they walk away, half an hour later or whatever to go back to doing whatever you do in life, right? Like, that just doesn't work. You can't tell me at 13 that my mom's dying and then just kind of like, okay. I mean, I couldn't, like, even, I don't know, think about anything else, right? Like, I immediately went into, like, a mode of trying to change things and make things different. And that mode ended up being very hypervigilant, which I already was. So, but it just meant that I didn't slow down enough when I needed to, because I always felt like I needed to make things more or easier for my mom so she could do less. And that did happen, but at the cost of my health and a lot of other things at times. And I'm not regretting what I did, but I do think there's better ways to do things, you know, and it would be good to have support. So, like, if, you know, when my brother and I were taking care of my mom and she was dying, we didn't really have support. And so, like, that's the biggest problem right there, right? Obviously that's a big problem. But, you know, in terms of the emotions of dealing with it, I think, you know, none of my friends, heck, what am I supposed to tell? Like, what are they supposed to say, right? They're like, we're in what, like 8th grade, 9th grade, something like that. My friends were so, I mean, they were really, really wonderful. And, it's also this thing, like, how do you talk to people about it, right? Do you tell people about it or not? When you meet somebody, right? You have a new friend for a month. Do you tell them or not? Right? Like, it's just one of these things. Like, are people going to pity you or have sympathy? Or, so do you just want to tell them? Or, I mean, because literally anytime I had a conversation with somebody and I told them, it was like, oh, you know, it's like my mom has brain cancer, and it's kind of like, oh, I mean, it changes things, right? But most of the time I didn't tell people, and the thing is, that doesn't work either, because you are going through the fact that your mom's dying, even though, like I said, it was so slowly. She continued to get worse progressively over the entire time. When she had brain surgery and they took out the lump, basically, is what they called it, then she would be doing a bit better for a while because it wasn't pushing on her brain anymore. So after the first surgery, it was kind of like I actually don't remember a lot of this, but most of my memories are gone because of my epilepsy, and the PTSD I got from that, and also the memory. I got like actual severe memory deficit because of my seizures. Like, they actually have caused a specific types of memory loss for me. And at the time also, when you're having seizures, and I wasn't like coding memories well, is what I would say. You know, like when you have a seizure and then you're really off and, you know, out of it and stuff, like you're not going to really code a lot of memories because your brain's just fried. And if that's happening a lot, then you just don't even remember things because, like, it's just not there. So anyway, I have a video on memory, and you might find that interesting. Yeah, I think my life would have been so different if somebody had talked to me that day. You know, like, it could have just been so much better and so much healthier, and just even having support, right? But also, like I said, having this right support, because having somebody dying, especially a parent, I mean, I know it's hard, like having a kid. I mean, it's all different, right? It's all different and hard in a different way. For me, having a parent who was ill, after that day, pretty much, I never wanted to get close to my mom, right? And that's scary, right? Because that went on for 8.5 years, and I pulled away. I mean, and I definitely didn't get closer to her, because, like, even if I knew she wasn't gonna die tomorrow, right? Even if I know she's not that kind of sick, right? She was not declared terminal until I was 18, when she stopped all treatment, right? But the reality with my mom's cancer was that basically it was never going to go away. So it was about delaying her death. And yeah, and I just wanted to say, like, that I think hospice is so awesome because they actually know how the family is feeling, and they can help you with that. And I wish there, like I said, maybe there would be more social workers, like, in oncology units in a hospital, like, just for just for the family. I mean, like I said, it's really, really needed. If you're a young person and your parents tell you that your mom has cancer, and it's not, like I said, it wasn't that it's not treatable at all. It's that it was like, basically, this is not going to go away. And I think that I understood that well enough that day that, I also didn't want to think about it, right? I understood it well enough to want to block out the reality of, she probably will never be okay, and she probably will die. It's just a matter of how long it takes. So that's, I also didn't want to, like, face that, right? Like, I don't want to talk to my mom about it, right? Like, there's just so many ways that it is, like, totally fucked up when, we had that. But I think part of, like I said, knowing that that's really a big deal, that moment, that experience, that learning that in that moment I had so many things in my mind and self and body that I reacted with that then set the stage for the rest of my experience with her dying. And part of that included, like, just that, me doing everything I could, which, like, yes, you want to do that, but no, you should not be 13 and feel like you're responsible for your mom being alive, which ended up being how I definitely felt, especially at the end of her life, when she didn't have enough help and I would not be there, and things would happen. I mean, it just became eventually that I just stayed there with her because it was too dangerous for me to leave. And that was really a really awful time, I guess you could say. And I mean, I did move back from college and live with her, but it was not as functional as that. It was more like I was having a lot of seizures and sort of living there and just taking care of her, but also not really living there. So it was just a really, really horrible time in my life. And I would say probably 19 to 21 were the worst. My mom actually died when I was 22. And like I said, actually the last 6 months were so much better. And that's what made me realize that, like, it could have been better, is that it wasn't about, like, it actually was worse, right? My mom actually got declared, she's gonna die at some point now, so we'll get hospice, right? And you'd think maybe that would make it even worse or scarier or sadder, and actually it made it better. Because I had some understanding. Nobody else knew how to talk about it, right? Nobody else knew how to talk about death. And like I said, this is not, people want to, what's the word? Save their kids from having to deal with whatever, right? But honestly, if you're telling them that you have cancer and you probably will never get better, there's really not much worse that you can talk about, right? Like, honestly, you just need to be able to talk about that. And my mom never talked to me about it. I mean, I don't know, maybe it would be helpful if the parent talked about it. But yeah, I don't think I ever really talked about it with my parents. Like, we didn't talk about it. But we didn't talk about the like ultimate, she's dying. It was more like we'd talk about what could change and what could help her to be better, make her feel better, and what would give her, less stress, and what would be a way to do a treatment that we could, and how, on and on like that, right? And nobody just wanted to talk about the ultimate situation of she's probably dying and will die within whatever. And how are we going to deal with that emotionally, and like how does that feel knowing that, right? Yeah. So the biggest things for me were definitely the somebody telling me it was okay to be mad at her, because I wouldn't have had to feel bad about it, because I just thought there was something wrong with me, right? Like, my mom is this lovely person who's dying and I'm mad at her. Like, it just felt wrong. It felt like I was a mean person or something. And like I said, when you look at it, in a psychology sense, it makes total sense, because she's leaving me, right? And I was just so upset that she was leaving me, especially in a really shitty situation. And I couldn't handle it, and it's like, so I was mad. And then, like I said, also just, having the support of talking about stuff, like actually talking about death, and actually talking about, like, how am I going to deal with that? How are we going to deal with that? What kind of support can we get? I didn't really realize, but I never got any support around my mom dying, and she got a lot of support from, like, the cancer center, and there was a cancer support group that she went to, and a cancer center art class she went to. And, I went with her to her doctor sometimes, and, I convinced them to put her on antidepressants because she was really depressed, but she couldn't actually tell you that. It was a lot of things, right? But never did somebody actually, like, talk to me and my brother and say, like, well, what are you gonna do when your mom dies in here, right? Like, what are you what's gonna happen then? Like, how are you gonna deal with it, right? Like, nobody talked about that. And also just the fact, like I said, for me, of like the last 4 years or something, she was, deemed terminal. What I mean by that is, like, she stopped doing any treatments, which just meant that it was going to slowly grow until she died, right? Like, so it's like, okay, so we're just waiting for her to die now. So that was kind of awful, I mean, to say the least. But like I said, there's something that needs to be done there with the family when you're acknowledging that you're just waiting for somebody to die. And when people are young, I was 13, my brother was like 9. I don't think anybody talked to him. I never talked to him, but we didn't talk about it. I mean, I don't know what to say, except that we didn't want to talk about that, right? I didn't want to talk about my mom dying, but ultimately in my head, that was there more than anything, right? And I didn't realize that was gonna, like, that was driving a lot of things for me, and I didn't even know it. And that perhaps talking about things, if somebody had talked to me and, been able to help me with some of the things I was feeling, maybe I would have been able to create a healthier situation for myself in the process of that and watching her die. And most importantly, a healthy situation in terms of mentally, like, because like I said, thinking that it's my fault or our fault or whatever, and then thinking that I can't do anything about it. I mean, like, obviously feeling helpless really sucks. So then it's like, well, what can I do about it? And so, yeah, I did that, like, until my mom died. I did what I could do about it. And I never talked to her about it. I mean, my parents didn't want to talk about it. I don't know. And I just, like I said, it was so crazy when the social worker talked to me. I think I talked to her once or twice, but it blew my mind that nobody had ever talked to me about any of those things. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like I was 13 and it was 8.5 years ago, and I was told that, and I remember that moment. Like, things would have been so much better if somebody had been there to talk to each of us afterward, individually, and who knows about death, like social worker, non-family. So that's my idea, and I really, really, really wish that any kid who was getting told that their parent has cancer, and I mean up to like 18, that they would be counseled right after. I think it's very, very, very important. My mom ended up being in hospice, and then she was still alive, but she was having a really hard time. She was walking, she was falling a lot, and so the last time she and I fell, because she was holding on to me. Well, she had a gait belt, so I was holding on to her. That was the last time before we, and I say we, like as in me and her doctors, decided that she should stay in bed. Once she was in bed, actually, I was so relieved, because until then, she was still trying to do things that she should not be doing. Whether that involved using the stove or standing up without help or whatever level she was at, she wasn't thinking clearly because of where it was pushing on her brain. And so I could never, get her to understand, essentially, to control her enough. I couldn't control her, right? So if I was gone, she'd do things that were dangerous. And like I said, we're talking dangerous because she's so sick, not just like she's doing dangerous things. But, for her, it's dangerous. It was dangerous to stand up when she wasn't supposed to, that kind of thing. So once she was bedbound, I was so much happier because I could leave and know she was safe. And it was such a interesting thing of like being like, this is really strange. Like, I'm so relieved that my mom is in bed, and I'd come and other people were there and hospice was there, and I'd come in and she'd be there and she was safe. And I mean, it was just, my nightmare was always that my mom was going to die because of something simple, and I think that's because there was the overarching thing of my mom is going to die in my head. But it was very possible that these little things, every time I left, I thought she might die, and that was 4 years or something of that. And hospice can tell you when, right? I didn't have to, once we were with them, they're like, no, she's not going to die yet, and they're amazing. They told us the week, they're like, yeah, she's going to die this week. Like, it was, and my mom's best friend from high school was a hospice nurse, and she came and she stayed there and spent the night that my mom died. And we left because it was decided that she couldn't die with us there, which I think was true. So, but we all said goodbye to her like the night before. But basically, the whole thing of like, anytime I left, I was just, once she was unable to think clearly and unable to make sense of what, she couldn't get things. Like, she lost her normal functioning of her brain. And slowly, over time, it just got more and more. So toward the end, it was pushing on her brain, and she'd lost all her logic and basic, reasoning and stuff. So it was kind of like a, kid where they don't know, they don't, you say don't do that and they don't listen, and they do it anyway, and it's dangerous, so you have to watch out for them, and you can't trust that they'll actually not do it if you walk away. Like, it's this thing of like, there's not the same adult there. And so a lot of people I know go through that of having, if your parents dying, of them becoming more like a kid before they die and having to deal with parenting your parent. And that can be really hard. And it was really sad that, my brother was really young and I was pretty young when that was happening. also, especially, toward the end, but my brother was only 18 when my mom actually died. And he was almost done with high school. And yeah, I mean, I'd like to know what his experience was in terms of what he was thinking, right? Like, we all had our own thinking, but we never talked about it. Like, it's really kind of strange to realize that. But when people don't want to say what nobody wants to say, right? Mom's dying, right? Like, nobody wants to say it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to acknowledge it, or mom doesn't have enough help, and if I leave the house, she's gonna die. Like, that's really scary. So that's what the last 2 years of her life were like for me. And that was horrible. And I just wish, like I said, once hospice was involved, it was so much better for me. And I just wished it would have been like that before, because at least I could have had a better experience of her dying, right? Like, that I could have had a little bit happier experience, more supported, a little bit happier, less traumatic. And maybe my mind could have been a little less stressed, if I were able to understand the feelings I was going through. And especially, like I said, not wanting to beat myself up about them because I thought they were wrong. So I hope for that someday.